I have found, Tom, in leading teams, there are only two things an effective leader needs to do. One, make sure every person that you work with feels valued. They feel valued for who they are, where they came from, what their outlook is, what their opinion is, the fact they came to work today, all those kind of things. And they are part of something bigger than themselves.
Welcome to Science of Leadership, the podcast dedicated to helping you become a better leader. Here, you'll gain valuable knowledge, hear inspiring stories, and learn the scientific principles that promote exceptional leadership. I'm Tom Collins, your host, and I'm thrilled to have you join us on this journey to becoming a better leader. Today, I'm honored to have retired Navy two-star Admiral Mike Manazir, a Top Gun fighter pilot, former commander of the aircraft carrier USS Nimitz and a carrier strike group, and author of this book, Learn How to Lead to Win, published in 2023. In this episode, we'll explore one of his most powerful leadership themes, trust. Why is trust not just helpful, but essential for leaders? Admiral Manazir's experiences bring this question to life in brilliant relief. Admiral, thank you for joining me on the Science of Leadership, and thank you for your service to our nation.
Hey, Tom, thanks very much. And it's wonderful to be here, and especially to talk about something so foundational as trust.
I read Lead to Win, or Learn to Lead to Win, shortly after it was released, and it was packed with exciting stories from throughout your career that you used to showcase these really important leadership lessons in great ways. Quite a few of those carried a common thread of trust. And before we jump into some of those old sea stories, as it were, could you share what trust means to you? How would you sort of define it?
Yeah, and it's such a difficult thing to define because it's an emotional connection. And I can give material examples of trust, as in flying so close to somebody that I am anticipating their move, that if they did something different, we'd hit. Think U.S. Navy Blue Angels and how close they fly, the level of trust. I have been in physical situations where somebody is belaying a rope on a rappelling, kind of a thing, and you have to trust that person, be holding the rope. I have been on a very, very dark night flying and landing aboard an aircraft carrier where I don't exactly know what the aircraft carrier is doing because it's so dark, and that landing signal officer is telling me what to do. And I've also been on the landing signal officer side, as is noted in the book and in one of the stories there, where the pilots are trusting me to do the right thing. And so trust for me really underpins the human connection of leadership. And I always talk about the human connection of leadership, Tom, where you don't lead with your title, you lead with your heart. You connect with everybody with your heart. And it doesn't matter where in the organization chart that you are. If you're the big leader, you're the CEO, or you're a middle manager, or you're somebody who's down here trying to lead up, the best teams are founded by trust. And the trust means there's a shared sense of values and everybody's focused on going this direction together, and they trust each other to the right and to the left of them to do all of those things. And so it is foundational. The other thing that I do that a lot of people have trouble doing is extending trust to somebody. Some leaders will say, you'll have to prove to me that I can trust you. I actually am the opposite of that. Mm-hmm. I know through my own research what somebody is capable of or what they're supposed to be capable of. Growing up in a fighter squadron, if somebody had a certain set of qualifications or they were a certain rank, I knew that they were qualified to do certain things. And so I would trust them to be able to go do those things. And I would just extend that trust and say, I am confident that you are competent enough to do these things, and I'm going to trust you with this. When leaders are leading a team and they want to get something done and they want to hand it over to the team, we could talk about delegation and trust and naivete, and we should do that in our podcast today. But as a leader, I found it most effective when I extended trust to the team to get something done, particularly when it was important. And they knew it was important to me. That really underpins delegation. It really underpins empowerment. People feel valued because the boss trusted them to get something done. And then when they were allowed to follow through and the boss said, that's an awesome result, now they feel really good. And now you can trust them more as a leader. They can trust you more, that you're going to empower them more. Everybody gets comfortable. You start telling each other bad news when it comes up and not just good news. And so that's how trust underpins kind of everything that I believe takes an effective leader leading an effective team.
Thanks for spelling that out for us. I think you hit on something that I actually wrote about in my book, The 4 Stars of Leadership, which is the leader should be the first person to extend trust, that it's on us to initiate, as opposed to, as you say, there are people certainly who are out there who say, I'm not going to trust somebody until they prove themselves. No, if you want to have trust in a relationship, you have to take the first step, because that induces in them, through something called the Pygmalion Effect, which we talked about on a recent episode, induces, in a sense, this way of thinking in people that they think I'm trustworthy. I'm going to live up to that.
You nailed it. And of course, the science of leadership, the thread beneath your podcast is perfect. There's an empowering effect when you know that somebody you respect, because she's your boss, thinks you are trustworthy and has trust in you and is willing to trust you. That makes you feel valued. I have found, Tom, in leading teams, there are only two things an effective leader needs to do. Two things. One, make sure every person that you work with feels valued. They feel valued for who they are, where they came from, what their outlook is, what their opinion is, the fact they came to work today, all those kind of things. And they are part of something bigger than themselves. And when somebody feels valued, they will go forever with you. That old cliche, I follow that person through fire. Why? You can't really put your hand on it. But one of those is when you as a leader extends that trust and you make them feel like they are a trustworthy person. That Pygmalion Effect, they give it back and they feel like they are a valued member of the team. And I totally agree with you. The boss models extending trust, because you need to, all those people with different backgrounds, and maybe they're a little more shy. They don't want to extend trust. They're afraid of failure. You have to model that so that they'll extend trust. So your whole team will perform at a higher level.
Well, thanks for sharing that. I'll tell you, this idea of trust has come up on so many of our episodes of the podcast. And, and I think we can't overemphasize it really, in that it is so foundational. It's a common thread that we see. And so I really appreciate us launching into this and you sharing that. Now that we've kind of defined what trust looks like, again, your book is full of so many good stories. Could you share a story from your career that really demonstrates what it looks like to really have trust in someone?
Let me give two stories. One of them is visceral, and then the other one is about backing up the people that work for you. So the first one I just said, so it's actually not in the book. So the good news is you get to hear it for the first time too.
All right.
So my first Pentagon tour was in 93 to 95. And part of that tour was I coordinated the schedules of the demonstration teams, the Navy Blue Angels, the Air Force Thunderbirds, and the U.S. Army Golden Knights. And so during the winter season, which is from November to March of every year, we would coordinate the schedules for the three teams. And so I would go to their winter training sites. Well, it turns out the U.S. Army Golden Knights, their training field is right in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, which is about 5 hours south of the Pentagon, which is where I was working at the time. So as part of the scheduling process, I would go down to Fort Bragg and I would talk to the sergeants. Now, they're all non-commissioned officers, and you all know that the Navy's commissioned pilots fly the F-18 and the Air Force's commissioned pilots fly the Thunderbirds, the F-16 Thunderbirds. And so, but the Golden Knights, they're all non-commissioned officers. Their boss is an 04 major, and all of them are Delta. They're all Rangers, and most of them are Delta. And so when I went down there to schedule them, this one particular time in 1994 to 95, the sergeant said, "Hey, Commander," I was lieutenant commander at the time, "you got to jump with us." And I go, "No, thanks. I'm good." I jumped out of a Tomcat. That's in the book. Not a perfectly good airplane, so I had to step out and stuff, but I don't feel like doing that. He said, well, President Bush is jumping with us. And I said, that's fine. It's a bucket list item. He wants to do it. I'm good. Thanks. And so then one of the sergeants goes, well, last week a 94-year-old grandmother jumped with us. And I went, okay, that's it. Of course, you can't throw a gauntlet down in front of somebody and go to do that. So a couple of weeks later, I drove down, I completed the scheduling stuff with the scheduling sergeant. I went to the rigger shop where they do all the pararigger stuff. And I was taught by a guy named Andy, who's a Delta rigger, and he does custom parachute gear for cargo and stuff like that. And of course, outfitting all the jumpers. And so he was the Golden Knights rigger. And he says out there, hey, there's two ways we can jump. One is tandem, a guy strapped to you, and we've seen it all on TV. And the other one is accelerated free fall, where you go out with your own parachute. A couple of instructors hang on to you at your upper arm and your thigh. And I said, well, I know how to work a parachute. I'd rather do the AFF thing, accelerated free fall. He's like, okay, this is what's going to happen. And so he's running me through all the kit and the gear and what I'm going to wear and all that stuff. And it was like military training. It's standard. I've been in the Navy now for 14 years. I've flown Tomcats for a couple thousand hours now and totally familiar with me. And so the next morning I go down to the drop zone, which is Rayford, North Carolina, which is where those guys jump down there at Fort Bragg. And we go up in their Fokker F-100 demonstration airplane. The same one you see at the air shows is black and gold and white. And there's a bunch of newbies that are sitting on a bench. And the only thing inside of this fuselage is just long tube, and there's two benches, one on either side, for the jumpers. And there's a bunch of new people sitting there that want to be Golden Knights. And me and my two instructors. The two instructors are Delta guys, and they're both 5'6", and they're cement blocks. I mean, they're just like badass, right? And I know they can kill me with their pinky. Won't even know I'm dead yet. And they're the two guys that are going to take me out. And so we quick brief, okay, we're going to jump out at 14,500 feet, 60 seconds of free fall. Here's the signals. We reviewed them yesterday. This means pull. This means scan. We'll give you these visual signals, and do this all the way down. And this, we'll hang on to you, and then you pull your own ripcord and we'll track away. I was like, okay, cool. So we take off. spiraling up to 14.5. We're the first guys out. And so we get up, and there's one guy on the right, one guy on the left. We kind of shuffle over to the door, which is on the left-hand side. And it's hard to do here on screen with you, but the guy on the left reaches down, pulls up this big cargo door. And all the wind rushes in. It's a little bit chilly. It's like, and 14,500 feet below is North Carolina countryside. And I went, oh, no. I backed up like a dog. I skidded backwards, total, terrified, completely paralyzed with fear. I had never had a physical response like that in my life. I'd flown aboard carriers at night, so dark, you get a pit of pain in your stomach. You're going to get aboard. From the book, I run around that time, 7 times, night in a barrel. Yeah. I did not feel fear like that ever until looking out of that door to my certain death. And I look out there, and I'm backing up from the door into the cement block on my right. And he's like 2 inches away from my face. And I said, hey, you guys have a good time. I'm good. I learned a lot here. You guys have a good time jumping. I'll go down with the pilots. And the guy on the right says to me, Commander, this airplane's going to land, and we're not going to be on it. We can either throw you out, or you can take us out. Your choice. Tom, in that instant, my fear disappeared. It went away. I mean, I went from total paralysis to, okay, let's go. And I took us out. His competence and my confidence in him, the trust I had in him, and those two guys, that they were going to save my life, and that stepping out of that airplane to certain death is going to be just fine because those two guys have my back. Total trust. That was a visceral reaction, and the one I talk about all the time. So the uncertainty of stepping out of that airplane to certain death and whether I was going to survive or not caused a fear in me that was paralyzing. And my trust in that person and those two guys, after looking in their eyes, was such that it took all that away. So what I talk about is, if you as a leader take away the uncertainty, you'll take away the fear, and people will trust you. And even when you don't know what's going to happen, they'll still trust you to say, okay, boss, I'm following you. And the second one is in the book. And that's when CAG Zap Zlatiper defended me for flying by the ship when we flew through the gunfire exercise. And when he asked me the question, so for the viewers, I got to fly Tomcats, perfect. I got selected to go to Top Gun, awesome. And so for the last part of the deployment we were on at the time, before we went home, the Top Gun section, the 2 airplanes going to Top Gun, us 4 people flew together all the time and did missions all the time. We were in QB Point, Philippines. The ship was docked at the pier there. The airplanes were flown in and on the field, and we were doing a mission up over what used to be U.S. Air Force Base Clark in the Philippines, and it was a simulated strike. And then we came home flying over the South China Sea. Beautiful water. There's a little island in front of us. We go up over the island, pull down, get back down about 100 feet above the deck, and we see this cruiser is pointed right directly at us. And so it's like, oh, cool, flyby, and so we get down there, 4 Tomcats, 500 or 600 knots, and boom, go right by, about deck level, 2 first, 2 behind us. Right between me going by and those guys getting there, there's a big white smoke puff. And the guys in the back go, hey, I think he's firing his gun, and they pitch off. And I didn't even see it. So we go back, didn't hear anything on the radio at all. And we go back in and land. Good break at QB. 4 airplanes come down with a great debrief. We slayed all the bad guys, and it went really good. So go back to the ship, go get changed. And I'm walking through the kind of the blue tile area where all the big people are. And the Air Wing Commander, Ron Zlatiper, call sign Zap, sees me go by and says, hey, Nasty. He goes, got a second? Oh, yes, sir. So I go in there, and he was a very, very down-to-earth leader. Like we talked about trust, and especially when somebody's very, very senior. I'm a lieutenant in the Navy. He's a captain in the Navy. He's my boss's boss's boss. And he's saying, hey, come on in here for a second. I was totally comfortable with him. He was very good. And he goes, hey, you go flying today? Yes, sir. Did you go up and do the strike? Yes, sir. How'd you come home? Came down here, showed him, he had a map on it. Can you show me on a map? Yeah, I came down here and went over this island right here, went by, hey, we flew by a ship, kind of thing. He goes, yeah, the ship. Did you know they were doing a gunfire exercise? And I went, oh. All of a sudden, I'm heading out on Liberty to go off the ship. And all of a sudden I'm like, uh-oh, there goes my Liberty. I'm about to get in a lot of trouble. I got to write a report. I'm like, no, sir. Did you have your radios on guard? This is the emergency broadcast frequency. Yes, we did. Eight cockpits. Okay, so 4 airplanes, 2 cockpits, radios. At least one would have been, tuned to guard, but pretty sure we all had guard up. No calls. There were no warnings in the brief that there was a gunfire exercise off the coast. Don't go out there. There was no information that came to us that said, you're doing a gunfire exercise. So I tell him all this stuff. And he goes, okay, you going on Liberty? And I said, yes, sir. And he goes, go have a good time. And so I left. Went on Liberty. I find out from my skipper later on, the commanding officer of my squadron, that CAG, after that debrief, called up the captain of the ship, who had released a report to the entire Navy that said these 4 Tomcats of CAG 15, our air wing, that his ship was attached to, by the way, had egregiously violated safety regulations. They had completely not listened to guard calls. We had disregarded all communications, emergency communications, and flown through his gunfire exercise. And he told the message was coded to go to the entire chain of command of the Navy, all the way to the Chief of Naval Operations in the Pentagon. And so CAG called him up and said, don't ever do that again without calling me at first. These guys were doing their mission. And in fact, I told them that their secondary mission is always surface subsurface search, which is why they did the flyby of your ship. So he owned the whole thing. And he didn't even tell me, but the skipper told me later on. So he had my back. And that, of course, elevated the trust in me of him, and his trust in me that I was telling him the right information. I wasn't trying to lie to him or obfuscate anything, but that kind of trust also endears you to somebody, especially when they were more senior than you.
Two great stories. Hey, I'm breaking into the podcast conversation here to share with you an exciting announcement. If you've been following the Science of Leadership podcast for a while, you've heard me talk about the book I've been working on. Well, I'm delighted to share that after over 3 years of work, my book, The 4 Stars of Leadership, is finally available. I'm so proud of this book and what it represents. I'm certain that you're going to find it immensely interesting and helpful as a guide on your journey to becoming a better leader. Seriously, you don't want to miss this book. I'm including a link to the book in the description. I hope you'll order your copy today. And please share it with others who might be interested. Also, please be sure to share your thoughts about the book with me. Now, let's get back to this interesting conversation on the science of leadership. I can really see the one with you jumping with the Golden Knights and knowing those guys from Delta. So for listeners who aren't necessarily well versed in the military, Delta Forces is kind of the best of all the teams, right? Like it's the all-stars of the SEALs and the Rangers and the parajumpers from the Air Force and all that. So these are legit special forces operators, and yeah, I mean, I think that we're not going to be on this plane when it lands, so you can choose. But I think that showcases trust beautifully, and then also your commander had your back, right? That was willing to take the heat, right? I think that something that I talk to people about frequently is if you want to really do tremendous damage, not that he specifically told you to do what you did, but if you tell somebody to do something, they do it and it goes sideways and you don't step in and say, that's on me.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the worst moves you can make, right? He went even, not only did he not do that, but he went a step further, right? And he said, no, this is on me. And I think that carries so much. And even now, as you think back on that, the commitment you still have to him.
Yeah. God rest his soul, he passed away a couple of years ago, but I do, and I tell people this story. The other thing I extend it to is when I want a high-performing team, I want them to stretch. And I tell people at the outset, I'm going to trust you to do what you know is right. Here are the things that are my boundaries. Here are the don't go past these boundaries. But everything else, I want you to stretch. In fact, and this is a quote, I tell them this, if you get in trouble for something and I don't approve what it is that you did, I will still tell the person you got in trouble with that I told you to do it, because there is some aspect of what I did tell you that led to you making this decision. I own your training. I own your actions. It was really an imperative on the ship. That's why I slept well every night as CO of Sacramento and CO in Nimitz, because I knew I was responsible for all their training. And so I better get it right. And if I didn't sleep well, it's on me. Like I didn't sleep right. So I would tell people, if you get in trouble, I will back you up. And I will even go as far to tell them that I asked you or told you to do that, and I'll take the heat. Now we'll then debrief, what a better way you could have done to do that. But I'm going to own all the actions. I don't want you to be afraid that I am going to crush you if something goes wrong on your side, because the best leaders assume that it is on them to communicate correctly. And if somebody in their team does not do something right, it's because the leader didn't communicate directly. It's not because the team member didn't get it right. They didn't learn something from you as the leader. You have to own every aspect of your team performance, such that if they do something that's unexpected to you, you still have to own that, because something you taught them is what drove them to take that action.
Absolutely. And then figure out what that was. Figure out where you miscommunicated or where you just didn't communicate so that you can correct it.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. Now there is people will say, so there is a naivete in trust, of course. And Stephen M.R. Covey talks about it in The Speed of Trust. Effective leaders do look people in the eye that they're working with, particularly when it's really important, to say, okay, read my lips here. We have to avoid this. And if somebody crosses a line that you specifically look them in the eye and they reaffirm back to you that they will not cross that line, and they fully understand, and you ask them again and again and again, and then they cross that line, that's a different conversation.
Sure. From your perspective, kind of big picture, why is trust absolutely vital to leadership, to successful leadership?
Oh my gosh. I'll go back to your Delta example, if I can get this right. Simon Sinek has a quad chart, and you might be familiar with it. And he talks about the SEALs. And there's a quad chart that you can put a candidate or a teammate in one of 4 quadrants on this quad chart. The lower left is low trust, low capability, like ability to shoot or tactics. The top left is high trust, low capability. So the 2 left quadrants. The top right is high trust, high capability. And the bottom right is high capability, low trust. The SEALs will take the person with less capability and more trust than they will the person that they don't trust that has the best skills. Because on a small team like that, which is founded on having each other's back, you have to know that when you're facing the other way, somebody actually physically has your back, whether they're covering it with a gun, whether they are, draped over the top of you to keep you from getting hit by something, whether they're telling you what's happening behind you. And in tactical aviation, which I was a part of for a couple of decades, you're trusting people to also look the other direction when you're flying a Tomcat downrange at 600 knots, that they're looking back here to make sure that somebody's not sneaking up from you back here. And so, bogey on your 6, brake right. The cliche, your 6 is clear, which means I have your back. There's nobody back here. Keep going, keep focused on the thing in front. That's where that comes from.
And that frees up, if we just think about cognitive energy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. You're in the cockpit. You've only got a certain amount of cognitive energy. And if a significant part of your cognitive energy is focused on who's behind me, can I trust who's behind me? Are they doing their job? If you're in part doing some degree of their job, you can't do your job as well as you could, right? So that trust alleviates some of probably a huge amount. I don't know if anybody's studied that particular thing and exactly. That might be an interesting study to undertake, but the degree of decreased cognitive resource that you have from the lack of trust in somebody that would otherwise be alleviating that strain on you.
Tom, I think you hit on something, and obviously sports metaphors always help, but think of a football team, right? And every position has their job, right? So for a play to be run effectively, each person on the field has to do exactly what they're supposed to do. And I would say that what you just said founds the underpinning of high performing teams. If everybody is allowed to focus 100% on the thing that they're supposed to do at that second, now you're going to get top performance capability of whatever that team is capable of doing. If somebody has to divert their attention away from what they're doing to take care of something to the left or to the right, that performance is going to be degraded. So I think that trust actually underpins high performance because of the focus you just talked about.
I know from reading Learn to Lead to Win, you had so many stories that showcase this importance. Do you have another one that you could share that really demonstrates the importance of trust?
I think the one that really comes to bear is the ejection story. The ejection
phenomenal story. I can't wait for you to tell it.
Yeah, that was quite a ride. For the listeners, if you haven't read the book, that is the story at the beginning of the book. And how did I get here, kind of thing. We're out flying this one particular gorgeous August day in 1987. I was in the front seat teaching the backseater how to do certain maneuvers in a Tomcat. We were doing exactly what we were supposed to be doing. And one of the maneuvers was this vertical recovery where you take the airplane up to zero airspeed and then let it fall off. The Tomcat had a particularly kind of sort of an egregious departure thing. It was very big. It's got big moment arms, and it would swing and pitch and run around, and it would make you feel like you're completely out of control. You need to do something with the controls. Well, the idea was to just leave it alone and let it flop around a little while, even though as violent as it got to be. And then after a while, it would point down into the wind, and then you could start flying it again. The reason we taught that is because most of the time when you're fighting another airplane, you're looking outside the cockpit and you only glance in at your instruments every kind of a quick scan and back out again. And oftentimes in the F-14, you could get up and kind of get parked, and you had to do the right thing once it got parked up here to make sure you didn't, depart the airplane and jump out, So the teaching of the students was, you get it up here, and if you all of a sudden figure out that, there's no more controls, and you look back in and the thing goes to zero airspeed, you just let it go. And now it's going to flop around. It's going to do this. It's going to feel like this. It's going to come off weird. It's going to go over, and it's unpredictable where it goes. Don't touch anything until you see positive airspeed on the airspeed indicator, and the thing, is pointing nose down. Then you can start to fly it again. So that was the demonstration. So I had also told the student pilot in the back seat that I had learned in my first squadron that you could actually go up to about 100 knots and push the airplane over like that, and it would just translate. And so you could actually go up in a planned maneuver with less airspeed than it took to do a loop. And you get up here and you push it this way, and it would kind of flip over like that and come back down. And I had used it tactically in my first squadron. I used it in Top Gun. And so it works great. So I briefed him on it. So we did the vertical recovery. It does all this whoa, like that. And you see, hey, this is just talking to him. And he goes, oh, cool. So then we level out. We're heading back to go switch cockpits so that he can do the same maneuvers. And I said, hey, we got a little bit of gas. Is there anything else you want to see? And he, fateful question. And he says, yeah, I want to see you do that flip on the nose thing. And so, okay, lock your harness, up we go. And so we started 15,000 feet. We go up full military, not afterburner. And we kind of come up this way. And then I'm pushing on I'm shoving on the stick. I can't get the airplane to come over. I mean, I am just leaning on this. I go right past 100 knots, right down to zero airspeed. And I'm still putting controls in, trying to make this thing go over. Well, the control that I put in, make it go pure vertical. I like perfectly vertical. And now it's just kind of rotating around its axis, falling out of the sky, but exactly straight up. It doesn't even fall off. It's just sliding straight down. Well, all that air into the intakes makes the engine stall one at a time. And so the first indication we get is this big ass yellow fireball goes bang out the left intake right next to my ear. Like, oh, that's kind of surprising, and this big bang, big yellow fireball, and then the stall lights go on, the tones go on, and in the Tomcat, it sounds like doo-doo-doo, 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 and the lights right here in the ladder lights in front of your eyes are kind of lighting up. And the engine instruments for the left side all go to bad. They're all red warning lights, and the engine quits. Actually, it's just fully stalled, so it's over-temping. The RPMs are coming down. And so the thing you do as a Tomcat pilot for a stall is no matter where you are, it doesn't say if it's 0 airspeed, don't do this, bring both throttles to idle. And so I pulled both throttles to idle, still straight up, still coming off a little bit because this engine had quit, and that engine's still working. So now it's coming off this way and starting to go on its back. The right engine stalls because I had moved the throttles. And now they don't have nice airflow, so they're not very happy. So the right engine, bang! And now both lights are going off, and the thing does very violent head banging, maneuvers on the way down. And long story short, to the ejection decision, I needed to get that airplane pointed down so we didn't eject because we had no engines anymore. And so I didn't give it enough time to just come out of the spin before I started putting anti-spin controls in. And we were not in a spin. And so I applied the wrong controls. And essentially I kept us in uncontrolled flight all the way past ejection altitude. So went all the way down to 8,000 feet. And the guy in the back, guy named Slammer, he's like 10,000 feet. Have you got it? And I didn't say anything. I'm like, somebody's going to do something here to recover this airplane. I can't figure it out. And we went past 8,000 feet. Now we're 2,000 feet below mandatory ejection altitude. 8,000 feet. Have you got it? No, eject, eject, eject. And so I reached up to pull the handle. That's the first trust thing. I hope this works. Literally thinking, this is where I die. It's it. And it was a matter of fact feeling. It's like, okay, this is where I die. Here it comes. And you just pull the handle. I hope this works. So I literally pull the handle down, and there's some more detail in the story, but there's like a measurable time lag between me with the handle in my chest and actual out of the airplane. Now, for the listeners, the ejection sequence in a Tomcat takes 0.9 seconds, 9/10 of a second. And it's canopy, back seat, front seat, boom, 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 and you're in chutes. I literally sat there going, why am I not out yet? And the canopy had already gone because Sam punched it off, and then he had already gone, and I was the last guy to go. And I'm literally thinking, why am I not gone yet? And then ow, 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 and then ended up in the chute. So now I'm over the water, and from the violence of the departure and all of the lights and the tones, everything else, floating in a parachute was epic. I'm like, oh, this is awesome. Quiet. It's beautiful outside. Just coming down. And everything I did was trusting that the riggers and the AMEs that maintain the seat, that maintain my parachute, that maintain my survival gear, that maintain my radios. Of course, you never use that stuff until it's time to, no kidding, bet your life on it. Everything I did worked. And everything I did as an action was following my training post-ejection and validating and verifying that it worked. And so, again, I'll let the listeners read that story on the ejection piece. It is kind of humorous in a couple of areas. But what I did after that, Tom, was I bought a case of Johnny Walker Scotch, Johnny Black. Not anything, I'm a lieutenant, I didn't, for Johnny Blue. I bought a case of Johnny Black, and I went around to every shop, including the Aircraft Intermediate Maintenance Department at NAS North Island, California, where they actually packed my chute and put it in the chute so that our squadron riggers could put it in a seat. And I took a bottle of Scotch to them, and I told them the story. And I said, thank you very much. I'm alive because of all of you guys. Here's a bottle of Scotch. And, and I told them that story. So yeah, the ejection is probably a huge trust thing. And even Sam in the back seat, he's trusting the nasty up front's doing what he's supposed to be doing. He's trusting me, and his wife hated me for a decade because I almost killed her husband, so she didn't trust me so much as Sam did.
Yeah. Great story. Thanks for sharing that one. As I was refreshing my memory, looking back through Learn to Lead to Win, I was reminded of another story, and in my mind, at least, I think it demonstrates the value of trust. And that's the story when you were the commander, air group landing signal officer aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln, and had to help Mark Baden land the A6 with a partial ejection. That's another incredible story. I was wondering if you would share that with the listeners.
Yeah. And then we'll talk about why the trust part is there too. So I was the senior landing signal officer on USS Abraham Lincoln as part of Carrier Air Wing 11. And what that means is there's a team of landing signal officers that are assigned to the ship, to the air wing. There are 2 per squadron. And what you do is you stand on the back of the carrier, back on the left-hand side, aft, and your job is to help pilots get aboard when the thing they're looking at on the carrier is not valid. So usually the landing aids on a carrier are valid when the ship is just kind of steaming straight. When it starts to pitch or starts to move around, because it's happening so fast, you often can't tell that the motion is not you, but it's the ship. And so you'll use radio calls as a landing signal officer to tell somebody like, hey, you look like you're high, but you're not. The deck is down. It's going to come back up. Stay right where you are, when normally a pilot would correct the high. So it might be something like, deck's down, hold what you got. Deck's up, you're a little low, a little power, something like that. So you're adding to the pilot's information while they're flying stick and throttle to get aboard, meatball lineup, angle attack to get aboard. Everyone, since I was the senior landing signal officer on the ship, you are the senior landing signal officer ship of the CAG LSO, is charged with a safe landing of all aircraft aboard the carrier in all conditions, no matter what happens. You're the person that they turn to. And so this particular instance, Mark Baden, the pilot, Keith Gallagher, the bombardier navigator, and A6 had a malfunction above Abraham Lincoln in July of 1991, where as Mark did a negative G maneuver to free up a refueling valve that had frozen in the refueling store, because they were the overhead tanker, that hard negative G to try to get the ice off the valve, it actually broke Keith Gallagher's seat, where it kind of connected to the ejection pole, allowed the seat to ride up 18 inches, which fired the drogue gun and the parachute on the top of the ejection seat. That's a shotgun shell. It blew the canopy out, took the drogue chute out, took the main chute out about halfway, and then it wrapped around the tail after it had pulled Keith Gallagher up to about his waist out of the airplane. And so I'm on the ship. We've just got done with a recovery, and we hear on the general announcing system, emergency pull forward, CAG paddles to the platform, which means go run back to the platform, get all the airplanes out of the way. Something has happened. We require an immediate landing. And so the ship is in a huge turn because it had turned out of the wind. And in naval aviation, in order to land aircraft on the ship, you have to have a headwind. Because that keeps you predictable, and usually the winds are not favorable to your course, so the ship will turn out of the recovery headwind for aircraft operations in between launches and recoveries, and will head down range to wherever it is we're going. In this particular case, we had to turn back into the wind for this A6 with a guy stuck halfway out the top. And so I meet the air bosun at the forewire, and he says, we have a partial ejection in an A6. And I think, okay, that means the canopy's gone, the bombardier navigator is gone, and the pilot's flying the airplane by himself in a convertible, and he probably can't hear. That's what I think about right then. And then the air bosun talks on his walkie-talkie thing, puts the thing back up and says, the BN's still in the cockpit. BN's still with the airplane. His feet are in the cockpit. And I literally thought that there's a guy hanging out of the airplane bouncing on it, like literally all the way outside with just like his lower legs in the cockpit. I'm like, what? And I go flying over to the platform, pick up the handset, pick up the pickle, which is what you give the visual signals on the meatball, which is the left landing aid on the ship, port side of the landing area. And the ship's in a huge turn, and I'm facing back this way. So the ship is turning away from this A6, which I can see approaching the back of the airplane from about 1.5 miles away, maybe 2 miles away. And he's angling over to catch the winds. And so what we have to do is we have to get the ship into the wind, steady it out, because we don't do well landing in turns. We've got to get the airplane on glide slope, get him on lineup, and stop him so we can get Keith out of the airplane. I mean, that's the outcome that we want. And so I'm watching the A6 come over. I'm seeing the ship in a turn. I realize here that I have to get the winds just right because we have a crosswind limit. There's a certain headwind you need and a crosswind limit. You can't have more than a certain amount of crosswind. And what I started doing was looking at the flags up on the island, the signal flags that are flapping up there, and I'm starting to approximate where the flags are with where the turn is, with where the A6 is, because we have to get him landed the first time. Because I don't know if Keith's dead, but more time in the air is not going to be good for him. So we got to land him. And so what I did, which is unique, is I started talking to Mark about his airplane and how he was flying it and what I needed him to do. But I also started telling the captain to steady up the ship. So I'm telling the captain of the ship, who is vastly senior to me, that he needs to stop turning so I can land the airplane. It was my role as the landing signal officer to get the conditions right to land the jet. And it was my judgment. And so usually what happens is the captain directs his officer of the deck to turn the ship into the wind. They have gauges that show crosswind and headwind. They get it right. And then paddles is slang for LSOs. Paddles lands the airplane. In this case, I'm doing all of that. And all I'm doing is looking at the flags, approximating where they are, assuming I have about enough headwind, about as much crosswind I can from the limit, and looking at the A6. So I just started telling the captain, and if you go on the web, actually, if you do A6 partial ejection, there's a neat story that Keith wrote about his experience, and there are a couple of audio clips of stuff, and one of them is me talking. And so I'm talking to Mark about his airplane. I'm talking to the captain about the winds, and I say, hey, captain, I'll take the winds. And about the third time I said it, he just a big God voice on the radio, steadying up. And so then the ship kind of steadies up, and you can still see the wake is turning a little bit when Mark comes across the ramp. And he landed successfully. I yelled attitude a whole bunch of times, which is pull back on the stick, because his hook literally skipped 3 of the 4 wires and grabbed the last wire on the roll. The trust factor comes in because I trusted Mark to have the airplane in the correct configuration to land the jet. Now I can see his flaps, I can see his landing gear, I can see his hook, but I don't know whether he has, he's dumped fuel down to his landing weight. But I trusted that he was ready to go. The captain trusted me to tell him where to put the ship. And I'm a lieutenant commander. I'm the CAG LSO. I have displayed to him that I can recover airplanes. I know what I'm talking about. I know what I'm doing. So he trusts me to do that. If I had not gotten that right, and if actually the winds were bad and Mark had ended up crashing into the ramp, that would have been the captain's fault. And so he literally trusted me with his career when he said, steadying up. And I told him, I've got this airplane. And so there was this entire circle of trust to get that airplane aboard safely. Keith ended up living. He is married fiance. They have 2 daughters. That life would not have existed had we not captured that airplane on the first time.
Another excellent story.
They're all in
Thank
the
you for
book, by the
sharing
way.
that.
Can you imagine one guy? There's 33 stories in that book, and half of them are nuts like that one. Sometimes I just reflect on that and go, oh my gosh.
They're great. It's an excellent book. I really have enjoyed it. So
Thanks.
Well, let me take a minute to share some of the science behind trust for our listeners. From a scientific standpoint, trust in leadership aligns closely with psychological safety. We talked about this concept before that Amy Edmondson at Harvard really has pioneered. Psychological safety enables teams to speak up, take risks, innovate without fear or retribution. Trust is the foundational element that enables the environment for psychological safety. I previously mentioned the work of Mayer, Davis, and Sherman, which they broke down trust into 3 components, which are competence, character, and benevolence, which within my own research, we would refer to as caring, the benevolence part. So 3 of the 4 C's of my framework of leadership. And leaders earn confidence when people believe that they are capable, honest, and truly have their team's best interest at heart. What we were talking about earlier, having your back, having your 6. Other research shows teams with high trust are more collaborative, resilient, and adaptive. When leaders model trust through authenticity and vulnerability, it accelerates learning, especially in high-stakes environments like the military, flying jets onto and off of aircraft carriers in the middle of the ocean, like that. For people that don't really understand, I mean, that's incredible. It really is a phenomenal thing that you guys, especially at night, roiling seas and all that, and somebody's going to plant. I mean, it's incredible to me.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Anyway, that's some of the science.
I love the science, Tom, and yet so many people. I mean, there's art and science to leadership, and you just, I talk about some stories that kind of demonstrate the art. I'm not as versed in the science as you are, yet so many people will not trust. Even when they're shown that when you do, the result's going to be really good. There's a fear in some leaders to extend that trust because maybe it reflects badly on them. And even though they're in charge of a team, and no matter how the team does, they're still going to be blamed or credited for the result. And yet so many leaders will not extend that trust. And I think it's fear-based. I've seen it so many times.
Yeah. We've hit on what trust looks like, why it's absolutely essential for leadership. Now, I think let's shift to some practical tips. What would you recommend for our listeners to be able to develop trust in those they're leading?
You have to do it by action. Delegation is a great external arbiter of trust. And so what I really want you to do, if you're a listener, I want you to take the crown jewel thing that you're working on and hand it to your subordinate leader and say, I'd like you to take care of this task. If you're like not quite there, then take something that you want to get done. You want to get it off your plate, gather the team together, hand them the task, and then have them complete it for you. Now, here's a secret. The most effective leaders talk about why they want it done. So the team should understand why. And you might have to reiterate it. You might have to tell them the why, but as part of an organization with a shared set of values, they kind of have the why, so they'll probably understand. You might have to remind them. You want to tell them what to get done and by when. So what's the deadline? Maybe there's an interim deadline or whatever, but here's what. You don't tell them how. Don't tell them how. And then you set up a battle rhythm of meetings with key people on that team. You open the door to the leader that you've given the task to and say, come in and ask me anytime what you need to get going. If you need more guidance, I come back in and give you the guidance. And most importantly, including don't give them the how. Don't helicopter away and say, I'll be back in a month to check on you. You must be available. And so the great liberating part of this task is you don't have to worry about the details of that thing that's been bugging you. You hand it to somebody. And if you've never done that before, that kind of delegation, do it once. And then maybe take your whole to-do list and go, I'm going to give that one to Sam. I'm going to give that one to Mary. I'm going to give that one to Jesse. I'm going to give that one to Mike. And I'll set up a battle rhythm to check. And guess what you get to do as a leader? Now you're up at the strategic level and you are just spinning plates. That's how I was the captain of an aircraft carrier with 18 departments and 5,000 people on it. I learned to delegate when I was an executive officer of the USS Carl Vinson. In fact, I was there on 9/11. I got to that job. The last command job I had was being the commanding officer of a fighter squadron, an F-14 squadron, where I knew how to do everything. And I was a pretty good delegator. But when I got to be the executive officer of a carrier with 18 departments, 5,000 people, I went, I can't do this job. I don't know how to lead this. I don't know what to do. And it was like, oh my God, it took me 3 weeks to figure out. I still use the same leadership technique as when I was an F-14 commanding officer. I just delegate everything. I mean, I had doctors and dentists and reactor officers and people that knew things that I couldn't even come close to. I knew enough to be the XO. We're trained in that kind of space, but I didn't know enough to run their department. So I had to trust them to run their departments. And it was remarkable. I led 18 other professionals in getting done what the ship needed done. So I'm down and in for the captain. Captain's up and out. Striker commander, the admiral, tells the captain where to be, and I make sure everything lines up to that. And I delegated to those 18 individuals on how to run the ship. That's trust. So I would do that. If you're a leader looking to be able to do trust, extend a task and see how it works out for you. See how much you have to engage. Keep from micromanaging. And if you have to make it not a crown jewel, but something lesser than that you don't really care about the result or that, give guidance. Don't tell them how, and make yourself available. And the more you do that, the more you will learn to trust people, the more you will assess people, because you will also learn how to look at individuals on your team and assess how they're doing and kind of the cues they're giving you. You can ask really good calibrating questions. One thing Navy nuclear power training taught me to do is ask why 5 times. And on stuff that I don't know anything about, I can ascertain whether somebody knows what they're doing and knows what they're talking about by just asking questions.
Those are great. As you were talking, and you mentioned don't micromanage, I was thinking about that. The delegating absolutely builds trust unless we don't let it go, right? If you hand it to somebody, but you keep your hand on it, that actually tells them, hey, I don't actually trust you to get this done, right? And so you're 100% like micromanaging. As you were talking, I was like, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, Tom, you nailed it. I mean, there's a balance. You can't micromanage because you will not demonstrate trust. You'll kill them because they won't know what they can do on their own. But you also can't helicopter away and go, well, I'm not going to micromanage this. I'm just going to go over here. You guys tell me when you're done. You can do that. And hopefully you have a very, very, very good team leader who will succeed for you. But it's very dangerous to helicopter away. Like I said, when you start leading in that way where you're delegating the tasks, you'll actually free up more time for yourself for better strategic thinking and your ability to kind of see how everything's working. And now your leaders are also, because you're delegating and trusting them, they're also going to tell you bad news.
Yeah.
Because if you're a micromanager and you're trying to own all those things yourself, they're going to go, well, he knows what he's doing, so I'm just going to let him do it. And there'll be a bunch of passive aggressiveness in your organization. You will get rid of all of that when you delegate to people because they'll start owning it.
On the podcast previously, I've shared a few things that that I keep in mind with trying to build this. But I think one that I don't think I've shared on here, but is actually in my book, is I think maybe is the most straightforward idea, and it's so obvious that it probably is easily overlooked, but is be trustworthy. If you want people to trust you, you got to be trustworthy, right?
Oh, Tom, 100%. I'm interrupting you. I'm just, that. You have to be an effective leader, you have to be honest, which means you have to say what you mean what you say, and back it up with action. You have to have integrity, which is the whole thing about doing the right thing when nobody's looking. And you have to meet your commitments. You absolutely have to model all of those. You have to model trustworthiness. This is the scouts, honor, Scout's oath, right? Trustworthy. You want to be trustworthy. If you're not trustworthy, you don't set up that psychological safety that you talked about, Tom. And oh my gosh, that's 100% foundational. In order to build trust, you personally have to be trustworthy. And that's in everything. I mean, I could go on and on and on about, little things that you can do to absolutely destroy trust with your people. And none of them none of them are secret. They're all pretty dang obvious. You just want to be a great human being. You want to be transparent. You want to use candor. You want to always meet your commitments. You want to show integrity in everything you do. You want to be honest and trustworthy. So you'll model that, and they will model it. Particularly important when you are in a multi-level organization, because you might be trustworthy, but somewhere down the chain, there's a manager that is not trustworthy. And guess what happens to your team? It fractures right there.
Again, this idea of being trustworthy. And so some things that I think of when I think of that, being consistent, right? Because, to trust somebody, we need to know how they're going to behave or respond, right? We need to know that if they're in this situation, here's how they will act. And so I think being consistent, people know then how we're going to respond. They know that if they bring us bad news, we're not going to freak out on them, or that we're going to do what we say, that follow through. That's another thing that I think is important in building trust, right? Like you said, action. You take action on what you said you're going to do. Yeah, I mean, follow through. I have this friend who is terrible. I mean, terrible about follow through. And I've told him, you're terrible about follow through, and he even admits to it. But as a result, people don't believe that he's going to do what he says. Yeah. Right? And so nobody trusts him. Oh, I've got these great ideas. You're not going to follow through on that. We're not going to even bother, right? You said, say what you're going to do and do what you say you're going to do. And then the other thing the other kind of practical thing on this I mentioned earlier, trust others first. If you don't trust people, they won't trust you. There's something about, I think, I'd like to get your thought on this. If we don't extend the trust to people, there's something it comes across as almost untrustworthy. Like, what is this? If you're not open enough to trust somebody, what are you hiding?
Mm-hmm.
You know, it plants this seed of doubt in somebody, I think.
Yeah. Oh, I think you're right, Tom. You know, again, I think I mentioned it earlier, but what is it that makes you follow a person through fire? And it's something emotional. And there's so many things that go into that human connection. I like being around them. Yeah. They care about me. They trust me. I trust them. They do what they say. There's nothing shadowy. That what you're talking about right there, you can feel it when you're around somebody and you're like, there's something I just can't, Mm-hmm. So you withhold. Other people, you'll tell them your life secrets and you barely met them, and because there's something about them that attracts you, and it's from that human connection, right? Directly from the heart. I've watched it happen. I've seen it both ways, and I think you're spot on. I think most humans have a really good sense of maybe danger. Mm-hmm. I think it comes from being a Neanderthal person and, looking at somebody as a threat or an ally. But I think it's all buried back in there somewhere in our personality, sensibilities, and all those alpha waves that are between persons sometimes, a kind of this weird connection, mm-hmm. you establish with people, even cursory. There's a look or an attitude or a reticence or something that causes you to hesitate, much the same as there is an aura that causes you to be drawn in.
Yeah, I think that's true. It is that connection, and we have to foster that. We have to invest in that on so many different levels. And I think when we do that, it really empowers the people we're leading and empowers us as leaders. Well, I've got one final question before we wrap up. If you could go back and tell Ensign Manazir one vital leadership principle, what would it be and why?
Delegate. You don't have to own everything. The reason why is that's where I got the most results. I'm a type A fighter pilot. I grew up type A. I have the kind of personality that started when I was growing up of, if we're sitting at a table and the boss asks a question, I'm going to wait about 7 seconds before I jump up and go, I got the answer. So working on listening and all those kind of things. But the only thing nuclear power training did for this fighter pilot is it made me more accurate shooting from the hip, right? But I shoot from the hip, right? Quickly. And I had an existential leadership moment when I got to be the executive officer of the aircraft carrier right at the 20-year point. That's 20 years of my Navy career. I'd been leading and following for 20 years. Mm-hmm. Right then, I don't know if I can do this job. And delegation was the secret because I got to trust these 18 leaders to do their jobs. And it became like that. And so, we talked about how to do that. For me, in my full journey, there's so many stories, and there's 33 of them in that book. They're how I learned how to follow and then how I learned how to lead. But I would say the inflection point for me in my leadership journey from a trust perspective is delegation.
Great way to end out our podcast episode. Admiral Manazir, it's been an honor to have you as a guest. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and expertise, and especially some of these great stories. And I recommend to everybody they get a copy of your book and read it because it's got some great ones in there. Thank you for being with us on the Science of Leadership today.
Hey, thanks, Tom.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Science of Leadership. We hope today's discussion has inspired you and given you valuable insights to help you become a better leader. Remember, leadership is about helping those we lead do great things. It's a journey of continual growth and learning. When we embrace that journey with curiosity, courage, and humility, we can confront challenges, overcome barriers, and foster environments where everyone can succeed. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow or subscribe, leave a comment, and share it with others who are passionate about leadership. Until next week, keep leading with character, competence, caring, and communication. This is Tom Collins. Let's keep growing.